Hello, my beloved friends. My name is Adam Nyao. I'm a minister in the Richmond and Hounslow Circuit of the Methodist Church. Thank you for joining me in this Bible month study of the Bible, where we are focusing on the book of Ruth. I hope so far you have enjoyed the previous sessions. Actually, the first story, which was focusing on Oprah, and in today's session, we are going to look at Boaz, who is the main character in this session and in this passage for our Bible study today. So, as we just look at the book of Ruth, I just want to highlight that the book of Ruth invites us to see things from different perspectives. As we saw in chapter 1, in connection with full and empty, bitter and pleasant, you remember how the story begins, where this family, Naomi and her late husband, Elimelech, and their two sons, had to leave Bethlehem, going all the way to Moab, because they were fleeing from famine in Bethlehem. So as they settled in Moab, the two sons got married. But as life unfolds, sadly though, Elimelech died. The two sons died. And here we had Naomi, the widow, as we heard from the previous session, the previous chapter, that now Naomi has to travel all the way back home to Bethlehem. So we're now in chapter 2. Naomi and Ruth have now arrived in Bethlehem. They are trying to settle, yes? They're trying to get settled. But as you know, that sometimes arriving in a new place, being new people, sometimes it has got its own challenges. Sometimes to do with reception, how the people are receptive to new people, to strangers. This is probably a situation that we cannot avoid. To mention that Naomi and Ruth, as they tried to settle in the early days in Bethlehem, they would have obviously faced such a challenge of isolation. So we can also see that despite that they are welcome, though, in some way, none of the town's women has brought them food so far. Even Naomi's kinsman, there's this guy that we're going to focus on today, Boaz, who is actually referred to as Naomi's kinsman. At this point in time, he has not yet reached out, although his name, Boaz, suggests he is a pillar of society. Let's just unpack this name, Boaz. Because if we read from the first book of Kings, chapter 7, verse 21, let me read this to us. 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 21. He set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called it Jachin. And he set up the pillar on the north and called it Boaz. A pillar which was called Boaz. So this name Boaz is symbolic. It signifies some strength in it. It signifies someone who is like a pillar in the society. But we can see that Boaz has not yet featured to kind of maybe show some welcome and some support to these new arrivals. I mean here Naomi and Ruth. But nevertheless, that's what we want to explore, as we shall see later, because Boaz today is the main character in this session. So in today's study, there are 3 B's that we want to look at. 3 B's. So the first B is where we see the breaking point. The breaking point. The first B is breaking. So where we see here, this couple, that's Naomi and Ruth, they have to break with the past. Having come from Moab, settling in Bethlehem, obviously there are some issues that they're still struggling with, psychologically, emotionally, and in all other ways. They are still at least broken. So at this point, they have to break with the past. So as we see from verses 1 to 7 of chapter 2, the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verses 1 to 7, that's what we see here, because they are in poverty as they are in Bethlehem now. They are characterized with poverty, with stigma. Yet they have to make really a very bold decision. They have to make a choice. Someone has to make a choice to say, shall we continue in this situation or shall we move on? Because that's life. That's about life. Because there are choices that have to be made, honestly. So here, Ruth, we see that Ruth makes a step of faith. She makes a big step of faith, stepping out in faith. Despite this situation where they are just confined to themselves, but now time has come, a point has come where Ruth says, now let me go out there. Let me go out and see what is out there. So we see that Ruth decides to take action, going to the fields to glean with the other, servants in the fields. Young Ruth goes out to take her chance. She's taking a chance to say, we need to survive. We need to survive. We need to find a living. We need to make life meaningful. So that's where we see where there's the breaking point. Breaking point, where they are breaking from that past. So here is now a new venture where Ruth is going out as she begins to find some kind of these menial jobs, gleaning in the fields. So that's verses 1 to 7 in chapter 2. So as she goes out to the fields, she finds herself in the field of Boaz. It's interesting here. So Ruth finds herself in the field of Boaz. I do not want to preempt here, but you see, a question we might want to ask ourselves is, why in the field of Boaz? Some of the things, when they happen in life, there's tendency to ask a question. A simple question, for instance, would be, is it fate or is it providence? Or is it luck or it is God here at play? We shall find out. But I'm just, teasing with these questions, that when things are happening, like in the story of Ruth here, as she now is then to meet and to encounter with Boaz, what's going on here? We shall find out. So, but then we want to now introduce Boaz. Who is this Boaz guy? Who is Boaz anyway? So Boaz belonged to Elimelech's family. You remember Elimelech, the late husband to Naomi. So Boaz is actually is family. Boaz is family to Elimelech's family as well. He is part of Elimelech's clan, part of his extended family. So they are related. Boaz is related. He's a relation to the late Elimelech, who is Naomi's husband. So Boaz is described. I like this about Boaz. He's actually described in the Bible as a man of noble character. He is a man of modest wealth and virtue. That's in verse 1. I'm going to read verse 1 again, to us. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So this version here, the NRSV, refers to Boaz as a prominent rich man. But as I was also reading from other sources, I like here that Boaz is described as a man of noble character. Oh, what a gentleman here, Boaz. Well, that's me. I don't know how you would like to describe him. So that's Boaz here for us. In verse 4, Boaz arrives at the fields. His greeting and character show he is a faithful and respected leader. In verse 4, let's hear verse 4. So just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." So you can see, you can imagine, the character of Boaz, that he is portrayed as a very humble man in this instance, a very caring man in this particular passage. How many of us have heard of stories from some of these big guys, when some people get into very high positions of authority, sometimes how they miss at least to show kindness, to show, courtesy and generosity to their subordinates. I think we have known, and we know stories of people who are some people who are in high positions who would lack, that sense of humility. But from Boaz here, that's what we see. He is so simple, a simple man, a humble man and kind man. He greets the reapers. He greets his workers in such a modest way. So you might want to reflect here. You might also want to see sometimes. I'm just raising here a point about how we miss, sometimes in life, how we miss to show kindness when we are in positions of authority or advantage. It happens sometimes in life. So that's Boaz for us. So as we proceed, we see then Boaz here has noted, because he knows the reapers, he knows them very well. So he has noticed that there's someone new here. And he asks a question, who is that young woman? Who is that young woman? And the supervisor in his response says, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." Wow. Do you see here how Ruth is being introduced, to Boaz? She is the Moabite woman. It's something to take note of here. I wonder if they had not known, Ruth's name by now, but they choose to introduce her as she is the Moabite woman. Here, I think we can also notice sometimes that there's an issue here about, someone who is a foreigner, someone who is a stranger, who can still be referred to in society, in the community, as the outsider or the stranger or the foreigner. These things are always happening in our society anyway. But I think I just want to pose a question here that for the sake of Ruth, being a foreigner, being an immigrant, what can we make out of that? Sometimes, when we have foreigners, when we have immigrants among us, oftenly they have been taken advantage of. We have heard on the news of how many immigrants, how many foreigners, how many strangers, how many needy people have been taken advantage of. In actual fact, have been abused. And hence, I would ask this question to us. Can you imagine how much immigrants have been taken advantage of and abused in our own world today? Women and girls in particular. So that's the story of Ruth, because we shouldn't forget that she is vulnerable here. She is a vulnerable young woman, a young widow, an immigrant, an outsider. So all these things are at play. But nevertheless, we still want to appreciate as well how Boaz takes his place, how Boaz plays his role as we have been already given that he is a pillar of strength. So when we move on now to the second B, you remember I said the first B, we are looking at breaking. Now the second B, we are looking at blessing. So now in verses 8 to 16, we realize now that finally Boaz and Ruth meet. Boaz shows generosity to Ruth. And in actual fact, we need to highlight that here. Boaz is actually obeying the command from the Torah, because it was in the Bible, in the books of Moses, the Torah. It was part of their commandment to show generosity to the immigrants and the poor. We can read that from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 19. So Boaz is here actually playing that role. He's fulfilling that task, that expectation. What is it about? So that's what he does. Protection and provision. He protects this young lady, this young woman, Ruth. He provides for her food. He actually instructs his servants to go and get some water for Ruth. We can read that in verses 8 and 9, verses 14 to 16 of the same chapter 2. So here we see Boaz playing a very crucial role. That's where actually here, I think that's where we can see his name, Boaz. The significance of the name Boaz now being fulfilled as he comes to the aid of young Ruth. And in verse 12, I'm going to read verse 12, where we hear this blessing. Actually, Boaz blesses Ruth and he prays for her, that God may reward her. Verse 12. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. So this is Boaz. He prays for Ruth that God may reward her. So Ruth is being rewarded for all the things that she has done, the commitment to her mother-in-law, Naomi, the loyalty, the support, the love, the care. So I think this is something for us to learn. You see, that's what God does. What we do for others, that which we do for others, God in return blesses us. So this is the prayer from Boaz, that may God bless you for the good things that you have done. I shall now move on to the third B, which is belonging. So as I wind up our discussion today, we now see that in verses 17 to 23, you see, Ruth now is finding herself actually belonging in this society, in this community. Because now she can also identify with the other reapers. She can, obviously, she has now started, maneuvering herself around the community and around the society. She is now known to the reapers, to Boaz, and I believe to the wider society and community. So now there's a sense of belonging. That's Ruth. So with her joy, where even she shares with her mother-in-law that, oh, now I've met Boaz. And the mother-in-law says, you know what? Boaz is actually my kinsman. Boaz is our kinsman. Boaz, to mean that Boaz is our redeemer. How about that? Redeemer. Can you see the introduction here of the word redeemer? Because in the Jewish culture, it was their practice, it was their cultural practice in Israel. When a man died and left behind a wife, children, and land, a family redeemer, who is here the kinsman, would marry that widow, protect the children and the land. So Boaz now is stepping in. Boaz now, as kinsman, is now coming in to take that role, to take that place, to redeem Naomi of her land and all that was hers. From this story, we now want to ask ourselves the question finally: what might the story of Ruth have to teach us about seeking justice for ourselves and others? It is a story about justice. Whose justice? Our justice and the justice for others. Today, friends, let us think of people who are in disadvantaged situations. Let us think today and pray about so many people who are in places of difficulty and challenges. But when God has placed us in places or positions of advantage, I think let us learn to always remember to do justice, to support others, to care for others, and to be pillars of strength. I want to thank you for your time today, and I hope you'll enjoy the next sessions as we continue in our series looking at the book of Ruth. God bless you for today and now. Thank you.